Hello, and welcome to the Thought Leaders Podcast, a locally grown podcast that brings you Waterloo Region voices and insights. Human Connections was a 2-day generator event held by the Early Learning and Literacy Alliance, ELA. Each generator session started with a conversation between a world-renowned expert and Dr. Jean Clinton, child psychiatrist, author, knowledge translator, and ELA advisor.
Hello, I'm Madiha Syed, and I'm a youth connector, part of the backbone team with the Children Youth Planning Table. And I will be your host for the final episode of the Thought Leaders podcast series called Human Flourishing. This podcast episode is partly in response to a conversation between Dr. Clinton and Dr. Angel Accosta, a contemplative scholar practitioner and principal consultant with Acosta Consulting. Here are a few excerpts.
If you're trying to get a community to aspire together, you have to tend to the human piece, the emotional piece. At the most fundamental level, can you create an experience where the community feels together? And that's very powerful. At a deeper level, as human beings, we have this capacity to connect to each other, to connect with ourselves. And in that connection, if you're grounded enough, you can really touch and speak truth, even if it hurts. And in that touching of that truth, that's where restoration happens. That's where healing happens. In fact, the condition for truth is to allow suffering to speak. Well, the same is true for healing, that a condition for healing is to allow suffering to speak. So can you create those conditions for things to be spoken? And that's so simple. That cuts through all those concepts.
Dr. Acosta spoke about hope as an evolutionary trait. When we stop and think about all that humans have gone through in the past, we could find hope for our future. And he spoke about gratitude even for the problems we have, because attempting to solve them can actually be our medicine. I think being able to let go of what's taking that spot of you, or like you're holding that grudge, letting that out and acknowledging that it is going to be a part of you before you're able to speak on it, before you're able to get over that. So I think that really struck me the most, that being able to share with other people and being able to be comfortable with letting out my own grudge before I'm able to help people with their own and give advice to them. Now, we'll listen to Dr. Clinton speaking with Ojibway Elder Elaine Garner and Madiha Syed, a university student, poet, and volunteer with the Muslim Student Association. Their insights to their lives and to life in general was a beautiful and touching journey in this talk. Dr. Clinton started by asking Elder Elaine what her main takeaway was from her discussion with Dr. Acosta.
There's a lot of things that he's saying that really resonates with being Aboriginal, because a lot of the things that he says are really simple in lots of ways about connecting to ourselves, but also connecting to our ancestors and connecting to the earth. A lot of the elders tell us to just put our feet on the earth to get a lot of balance and just gratitude for being here. The other thing I thought that he did was in bringing, as I said, all of his ancestors in, and also being able to have ceremonies that help us heal. And I was thinking about sweat lodges, because they really are very healing, and people tend to really speak from the heart.
Yeah. Well, Elder Elaine, can you describe for us who may not know all about the teachings of the Sweat Lodge? Tell us a bit more about that and the healing.
Well, the Sweat Lodge is an actual structure that's put up that's done with willow arches, and then they put around tarps, and it's probably big enough to hold about maybe 15 people in it. And what happens is there's a firekeeper outside, and inside they have the grandfathers, which are the rocks being heated in the fire. And then when it's time to have the sweat lodge, they bring the rocks into the, or the grandfathers into a middle fire pit and put them in there. And then the people enter and they sit around this, and then they close the actual doorway, and they put there's an elder who's looking after the sweat lodge. And what happens is they pour cold water on the rocks, so it becomes very, very steamy and very hot. And so then everybody gets it, and they chant and they talk, but then everybody gets to speak if they want to. And at every quarter direction, they can open it. So if the person is feeling really, really overwhelmed, that they can step out for a while and then come back in again. So it's pretty incredible. And your mind gets really cleared out after you've done that.
Yeah. So it's bringing the presence of the ancestors into the healing process, and they being fully present in the moment is so much of the teachings. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Elder Elaine. Madiha, tell me, what were your thoughts and reflections and experience of listening?
I'm still processing because I'm just, it feels so good just to listen to someone who is so in touch with what they're learning, and they have that passion, because sometimes you hear people and if you don't hear that passion, it doesn't sit as well in your heart, right? And he has that passion for what he's studying and what he's researching and what he's teaching. And I'm in love with the fact that he mentioned that community and mentioned that healing is different. Mindfulness is different with every community, right? Within the Indigenous community, with immigrant families, with the Black community, with people of color of Latin America, or the Asian community, right? It is different, and it's not a synonymous experience, but there is that underlying level that everyone is healing, everyone is suffering, and we all are trying to find ourselves within that. We're all trying to thrive from what we have faced. And it is important to me because sometimes we often compare ourselves to these Western standards and say we're not meeting the bar, when that's in fact not true at all. We are reaching the bar, if not going past the bar, in our own ways, in our own goodness, and that doesn't minimize our experiences. So I'm just processing. I've learned so much, and I'm so happy to be here and have this conversation with amazing people today.
Well, it's such a pleasure to have you here as well, Medea. He talked about human flourishing, and I wonder, Elder Elaine, from the Iroquois perspective, we think about becoming a capable person. And I'm wondering, from the teachings that you have learned and shared in the oral tradition, what does human flourishing look like from an Indigenous lens?
I would say that it's the best way that would happen is if you stayed with your family and got your teachings from the different generations, because that's how it was initially planned, that our life would be like that. But there's been so many disruptions with taking the children away. And so now what we have to do is go back to that and start learning our traditions all over again, so that we can pass them on to to our new children. And also, that was a hard time for our parents, because they weren't being able to be parents because they were in the residential schools. So it's a whole new way of being, but it's one that we're really hopeful that we'll get through. We have a lot of love between us and our communities that say that we are going to get through this and we are going to heal. And I find that, the basis of our traditions is about love and kindness and heartfulness. And I'm feeling that more and more and more now. And we're able to pass it on to other organizations that are trying to help each other and help the communities around us that are trying to, help with all of the problems that are out there, like homelessness and being on the street and just a lot of pain that people are going through. And COVID seems to be making it a lot worse.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to really, really support each other and to be there. And one of the things that Dr. Acosta said, that people have to learn to listen, ask the right questions. I thought that was a really good thing to say, is not what's wrong with you, but what's happened to you, because that's really where our life in this day and age it starts from, really, is what happened to us and how can we get the healing, and not just for our community, but for everyone. I think right now, just meeting with different peoples and different committees and things, I can really feel a lot of hurt in a lot of different people. So I think this whole big thing about human flourishing is really important for us, and the shared sense of being a community, and all we want to do is help each other so that we can flourish, I think is really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. So, Madiha, I wonder, tell me what does flourishing look for you as a young woman in Canada?
For a long time, I thought flourishing is once you've healed, right? It's a destination that we are all aiming for, that once we have gone through what we've gone through and found ourselves healed and fully recuperated from what we've gone through, that we have now flourished. And this is a new process or new thought that I've been going through in the past a year or so of my life. And now, after hearing Dr. Acosta, I was like, truly flourishing is this whole process, right? Is when the community comes together, exactly what he said, community coming together, having that connection, being grounded, and then with that truth, healing. That whole process is flourishing, right? To not be trapped in this generational trauma and generational toxicity that we often find ourselves in, right? For a long time, I struggled with my identity because as a visual, look Indian, right? I'm an Asian of Asian descent, but was born in Canada, lived in Canada, and I struggled with these different identities, and I didn't know who I was, right? And I felt very alone in that. And my parents didn't talk about it much. My grandparents didn't talk about it much. And my grandparents had migrated to Canada in the 70s. And it was literally this past weekend where I finally gained the courage to ask my grandma. And she's not one to talk about what she has gone through. And she's very, like she doesn't talk about her pain. And she brought up the fact that, for the first time in my life, the fact that she didn't teach her children her culture. She didn't teach her children her language because she herself was made fun of it. She herself was isolated from the larger community. And so my father, he grew up without any connection. And then I grew up without that connection as well. So I thought this was an isolating experience. This is something I myself has been facing, when in fact that my father had faced this, my grandparents had faced this. And it was through that connection between three generations, it was through that communication of three generations in which I found myself less afraid of the fact that I couldn't speak my mother tongue. I felt less embarrassed and less humiliated. And I was able to take that step to, maybe it's time to go learn it, time to go take some classes. And, perhaps even though I can't speak it well, speak it. And I found that I haven't flourished because I can now speak a language. No, I have flourished because I'm finding healing and I'm finding truth within my father and within my grandmother. And it's so funny because this is something that's just coming to me right now, which is why I'm kind of like, wow, flourishing is it's not just an end destination, it's a journey. And the fact that we can go through this journey as a community, and that community is not just people who look like me. Journey is with Elder Elaine, journey is with Dr. Clinton, journey is with everyone in this conversation today. That community that we have together that helps individuals find the places they need to go and find the healing that they need to get.
Oh, that's just so amazing. And like there's this thing called serendipity. Like, why would it be that just the weekend before you're going to be on a panel like this? Did you have that kind of lived experience with your grandmother? It's just so beautiful. Elder Elaine, what are your reactions to what Medea has just said?
Well, I've certainly experienced some of the things that she's saying because I lived in, I didn't live on a reserve. I lived next to a reserve that was way up on Lake Nipissing. And we lived like way in the woods and lived off of the animals and things like that for until I was around 6, I guess. So then when we came out and we were introduced to the city and stuff like that, and then I went to high school, there was a lot of prejudice. And so it was very hurtful. And so it's taken a long time for me to heal from all that, and to still sometimes I'm very shy and I think, should I do certain things or not? But I'm getting old, so I say, why not? And carry on. But so I do share those experiences, and I too didn't learn my language. I'm learning it now somewhat, but my grandmother didn't speak English at all. And so, but we were just little, my brother and I, so we didn't, we learned some words, but not the whole language, which I was very sad about.
This experience of trauma, you're describing the kind of, so what I'm hearing is the intergenerational healing that you're going through. Elder Elaine, as you're learning your language, Medea, as you're learning your language and connecting and making these relationships with your grandmother and recognizing some of the fear-driven behaviors, like profound fear, is one of the things that strikes me as held them back from speaking their language.
There's definitely fear involved, right? Because something that is unique to, I guess, the Indigenous experience, and as a family of immigrants, right, or people who don't traditionally look like a Western Canadian, we are trying to heal and find support in an environment that can sometimes be hostile, right? Within our own community, we have support, but outside that community, there is an external pressure, right? And an external force of racism, of sexism, of Western ideologies that make a sense of fear within us, that if we show our hurt, if we show how we are struggling, that perhaps that would be our downfall. Perhaps that would be what others could use against us. And I know that it's very true for me. For a long time, I myself would only talk about the good parts of my culture. I wouldn't talk about how us as a culture would be struggling and our downfalls or our faults, right? Because I feared that people would use that against me and use that for their own propaganda or agenda, to be like, this is why we shouldn't have immigrants in the country. This is why we need to eliminate these types of people from coming in. And that sense of fear is very driven, and it's a huge factor in why we are struggling to have these conversations and struggling to have those interconnection between your generations. Like, it took me 19 years to talk to my grandma about this, and I wonder how long my grandma has held this to herself, has not talked about it. But we can find hope, right? Because as Dr. Acosta says, hope is something that everyone has. It's just, what do we do to tap into that? And to tap into it often takes someone to take that first step. And I think that's beautiful. And I think that we can eliminate fear, or at least minimize fear, once we choose hope, and choose hope to drive us instead of fear.
That's great. And I think too that certainly, being older than you are, I don't feel as traumatized anymore because of prejudice. I just go through life. I'm very optimistic, so I really spend a lot of my time trying to be as optimistic as I can in all kinds of situations. And so I'll really say that since I've gotten older, it really makes a huge difference in my hope and my optimistic feelings about the future. And I think what we need to do to have flourishing communities is to really educate, because Dr. Acosta was talking about how to break down the structures to make things heal. And I think the only way you can do that is to get right in there and work with these structures, and to educate people on how this got there and what it really does to other people. And that's going to be hard for the people doing it, and also for the people receiving it. So we're going to have to do it with a lot of sense of honesty and caring, and trying not to be horribly in conflict, so that because I think always that we have to work from our heart.
You're listening to the Thought Leaders Podcast, featuring Dr. Jean Clinton, in conversation with Ojibway Elder Elaine Garner and Madiha Syed, a university student, poet, and volunteer with the Muslim Student Association. This podcast is an extension of the Human Connections Generator event, brought to you by Ella. Let's rejoin this heartfelt conversation.
Dr. Acosta was kind of describing the conditions for relational bonding, for connectedness, so see together on the future.
Yes.
So what strikes me about that is that, from my understanding, is such an indigenous way of knowing and being.
Yes.
And it's kind of contrary that you have to fight so hard to have that way of being understood in a dominant culture that, as Medea is describing it, don't make a mistake, because they're going to say, there you go, I told you so. Don't make a mistake. I told you we shouldn't do that. Those people. So there's such a huge tension. And, I wonder how you, as an elder, Elaine, here you are, and you're a different spot across the fire now than Medea has. But I wonder how you've reconciled that. How have you come to this in your age? And Medea, what does it inspire in you as you hear this?
I would say, I worked for 33 years in a institution, and I worked with students most of the time, and the students were incredible. I mean, I got along really, really, really well with students. Not always with the administration, because I think there was a lot of prejudice for a while. And so I really did have to go through that and when I was much younger, it was very hard for me. I mean, it really, even my family said, if you don't get out of there, you're going to go crazy. But I stayed with it, and I came out at the other end really, really happy that I'd stayed. And now, and a lot of the students that I worked with were white, and the Indigenous students that came down from the north and stuff like that. So it was really good for me to be there and work with them. And so that was my reward. And then eventually it got better. So I guess the creator said, okay, I'm going to make it easier for you. And then as I got older, as I say, I just became more confident in who I was and the teachings that I was getting. And so I just said, okay, I can do this. And so I stayed on, and I retired in 2014. But I think the other thing is to work with the young people and really help them to learn about their spirit and their heart. And, you know, this whole big thing that Angel was saying, that they have to feel that they have their ancestors, their grandmas, their aunts, everybody around them to help protect them and make them feel like they're not on their own. And I think that's really important.
So, you know, again, and Medea, I want to hear your thoughts, but again, the concept of belonging and relationships has you know, been so much a part, as you're describing it, Elder Elaine, has been so much a part of your learning and your living, and possibly your loving, because, you know, it shows your love of those students that you helped over those years was what kept your fire alive.
Exactly.
Yeah. Medea, what's your reflection on this?
I also think, continuing off of what you said, that Elder Elaine is resilient to the circumstances she was under, to teach those students, teach those younger people about her teachings, right? And taking what her elders told her. And that resilience is just inspiring, right? I couldn't imagine living in a country which land belongs to you, but you are under it's such a unique experience, and that is a type of strength that not everyone has. So thank you for what you've done, and thank you for your teachings. I've always said this, that our elders are bodies of the present, but souls of the past. And when you lose those elders, you lose your teachings from the past. So it's important to take those teachings and keep them with yourselves, because they go through lived experiences that the classroom can never teach you, that textbooks could never teach you, the internet can never teach you, right? And it's so important that not only are youth more involved and more have a conversation at these tables, right, and are available to speak to, but we also need youth to connect with their elders, and youth connected with the Indigenous culture and with their own ancestors, right? Because it's through those connections that we find these strengths passed on. The resilience that our elders before us had, that is passed on through these conversations. And it's really important. And it's so important of what Elder Elaine is doing, and it's important what I'm doing. And it's important that we have these places where we both can communicate and talk to each other.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that strikes me is we've talked about fear, but there's also, it seems to me, and what the both of you are talking about, is an element of shame. And you know, we talked about shame earlier, around parent shaming, and you know, it's an interesting emotion that I want to dig more deeply into in terms of the science of it. But I wonder if that has played a part in your life's unfolding and in your cultural unfolding, shame. And did Dr. Acosta give us any insights into how to go beyond that?
In my earlier years, I had a mother, and my father was absent most of the time, but my mother was a very optimistic and believed in us and said that my brother and I could do just about anything we wanted. And she was very loving. And so that really helped a lot until, you got out into the real world. And then there was a lot of shame because I was with people who said very nasty things to us. And that makes you feel very insecure, and the fact that you're not good enough. And then my grandmother, my mother's mother, spent her life trying not to look Native, and she wore really light makeup and had her hair red and just really never talked about being Aboriginal. And so, yes, that made me feel very uncomfortable too. But my mom just trucked along and did her amazing stuff and just said, keep going. You're going to be okay.
Yeah. Well, the power of that attachment relationship and believing in you and knowing that you were seen, that you were secure, that's something. That's really something. Medea, what about you?
So I'm still pretty young, and I still haven't gone through all my lived experience. I am still moving through those moments of shame, and I still do feel them all the time with a lot of different parts, right? As someone who's come from, I have a unique experience of having family here, but also knowing that I have family back in my mother's home country. I feel like when I'm in this Western society, I'm ashamed to wear cultural clothing. I'm ashamed to be cultural to a certain extent, but then also when I'm in these cultural settings, I'm ashamed of how westernized I am, right? And then that kind of plays on me. And even at university, I'm part of the Muslim Student Association, which is this amazing organization that creates resources and settings for Muslims who have faced issues to like get the resources they need, connect them to mental health institutions, get them connected to chaplaincies, whatever it may be. But sometimes I'll be doing amazing work there, and I'll go back to my regular friends at like the architectural faculty, and they'll be like, "Where did you come from?" And I'll say, "Oh, picnic." And I don't know why I do that. Still working through it, but I have this sense of shame in what I do. And sometimes I'll be very proud of a certain thing, and then when I'll go into a certain environment, that pride just disappears. It just goes away, and I feel very, very like I have done nothing with my life. I'm very uneducated, or I'm not near the standard as everyone else. And I think that comes back to that marginalized communities have a different bar than, say, the Western community does, right? So when you have a cis white male in an interview room versus a Black woman, she has to go above and beyond to get the same position as the cis white male does. He would have to do 50% of the work. And there's like research studies where if you're a male, you are more likely to apply for a job that you only reach 50% of the the application, where women will not even apply a job they're fully equipped for, right? So that comes back to that as well, where I constantly feel like I have to go above and beyond in every setting I am to be worthy to be in that room. And so that is a shame I'm still working through, and I'm trying to have these conversations with people around me because I know I'm not alone in it. But it's good to hear that shame does leave. When I hear Dr. Acosta talk about it, and even Elder Elaine talk about it, that's something that I can move past and be more confident in myself and be more prideful of what I have done and what I will do. It feels good to know that there's somewhere better than where I am today.
Wow. Elder Elaine, I'm wondering from your perspective, a different place around the fire, what would you say to Medea in her journey?
I would tell her to be true to herself, and to really start feeling from your heart that if you've got your heart in everything that you're doing, your higher power is looking after you, and you have to start being proud of the things that you are accomplishing, and just keep putting one on top of the other and realizing that you're a really special person and that you have a lot to give to the world. You're young, you're doing well now, you're going to be even so much better as you get older. So you have to realize that that's coming up. And so, you can take that back to your family as well and say, maybe when you're talking with your community, like your younger community, that you bring up these subjects and talk about it so that you all realize that there are problems and that you speak about them and you own them. And that's one of the things that Angel was saying, that sometimes it's very hard to accept the hardness of what we're talking about. And so I think sometimes you just have to do that and talk it out and try and find ways to help each other. And if you need to, do you have elders in your community?
Yes, we do have a similar environment as Indigenous do, where you have the elders who you go, and we call it mashwara, when you go and take advice from them. And
Yeah.
it is people who have lived experiences and have more knowledge than you would.
Yeah, so maybe you need to see somebody like that and talk to them too. But I think you're going to be really, really successful, and you're in a great field. And so, and if you ever want to talk, actually, you could give me a call.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Oh, isn't that wonderful? Medea, I don't have the wisdom. I don't have the lived experience of Elder Elaine. But what I'm propelled to share with you is that what we look like on the outside doesn't necessarily mean that we're that composed in the inside. And that, I still carry lots of shame within me, but I choose to, and it's the message of hope from Angel. I choose which of the many me's are going to be the one that I spend the time with.
Mm-hmm.
Which of the many me's, because there's many me's, and which are the ones I'm going to spend the time with, and which am I going to raise up, and how am I going to find the company who raise up the best in me. So I just feel a little bit compelled to say thank you so much for your courage in sharing this. And my humanity, my heart says we're more alike than different. And so I want to absolutely wish you well, both of you, on your journeys from here. This has been an amazing, heartfelt, I'm getting goosebumps conversation here with such tremendous optimism and hope. And I want to say a major miigwech and
miigwech to you.
Thank you very much.
A lot of the times there's a really big gap between youth and adults, and being able to bridge that gap is super important, or else there's always gonna be a big space where youth will always be super uncomfortable talking with adults and vice versa. So just being able to talk about things even with adults, that doesn't necessarily have to mean you have the same background or same culture, but being able to connect with an adult or even a youth as an adult is very crucial. So where that intergenerational gap doesn't necessarily exist, and you can connect on several levels without being uncomfortable.
You've been listening to the Thought Leaders Podcast, featuring Dr. Jean Clinton, in conversation with Ojibway Elder Elaine Garner and Madiha Syed, a university student, poet, and volunteer with the Muslim Student Association. This podcast is an extension of the Human Connections Generator event, brought to you by Ella. The host for this episode, Adan Imran, a youth connector on the Children and Youth's Planning Team's Backbone staff.
I hope you enjoyed that intergenerational discussion of experience, wisdom, compassion, and healing. I know I did. It was like listening to Dr. Acosta's knowledge and teachings in action, wasn't it? I'm so grateful for the opportunity to bring a youth voice as the host of this final episode of the Thought Leaders podcast. I hope we continue this conversation.
Special thanks to the host for this episode, Adan Imran from CYPT. Our gratitude to Dr. Jean Clinton for hosting our Human Connections event and helping to translate the knowledge of experts with community. Thank you as well to Elder Elaine Garner and university student Madiha Syed for their honest and open reflections and wisdom. Lived experience is a powerful teacher. The Thought Leaders podcast is part of Ella's Human Connections series. They are available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Kathy Lee Porter, Ella's Activator. Thank you for listening.